Imagine the following scenario. You are 14 years old, living with your family in a grueling forced labor camp for simply speaking out against a totalitarian government. A particularly sadistic government soldier overhears your family talking about escape. He confronts you, gun in hand, questioning your family's intentions. You have no choice. It's me or them, you figure, and reluctantly, you spill the beans. You admit that your mother and sister were discussing how to escape from the camp. As a result, you, yes, you, the one who fearlessly turned your family in, is tortured. Worst of all, you are forced to watch your mother and sister's execution. Refugee Shin Dong-hyuk, the only known North Korean to ever escape a total control of political prison, experienced this horrific account in his childhood. It is experiences like these that brought Shin to America in order to raise awareness of the dire state of North Korea, and also raises the question of how else the North Korean government has violated United Nations human rights laws throughout its relatively brief history.
North Korea has been abusing human rights for decades, violating international human rights laws, and has escalated to the point of genocide in recent years. It employs a fear-based regime which forces citizens into submission, sends political opponents to forced labor camps, dispatches thousands of temporary workers across the globe to foreign countries to earn money for the North Korean government.
Violations of human rights in North Korea have occurred ever since the division of the Korean Peninsula in 1948, which left the Soviet Union in control of the northern half and the United States of the southern half. The United States formed the southern half into the Democratic Republic of Korea, and the Soviets formed the Communist Totalitarian Democratic People's Republic of Korea. While South Korea has today transformed into one of the most modern and innovative countries in the world, North Korea has been left stuck in a standstill and is severely underdeveloped due to its self isolation and shielding of its citizens from the outside world. Less than half of their airports have paved runways, their road system is just one-fourth of the size of its southern counterpart, and have just one internet network, the Kwangmyong, which is heavily restricted by the North Korean government and limited to just 3 gigabyte data usage.
These circumstances, in and of themselves, are certainly not violations of human rights, but merely an example of the underdeveloped infrastructure and the outside assistance required to develop in an isolated corner of the globe. What is a violation of human rights, however, is the strict fear-based regimen North Korea employs to keep their citizens from questioning or uprising against the government. Everything is controlled to the extreme in North Korea. There are seemingly countless laws restricting what citizens can and cannot do, and the failure to meet any of these requirements results in unbelievably harsh punishments. For example, crimes as simple as a failure to dust off a picture of North Korean founding father Kim Il sung can result in you, your future children, and future grandchildren all being sent to a political prison camp in what is known as guilty by association. Other absurd unlawful acts include interracial relationships, private enterprise, international telephone calls, failure to adhere to government approved hairstyle regulations, practicing Christianity, and even possessing the same name as the supreme leader. Anyone whose name Kim is forced to change their name. Again, not meeting any of these requirements can result in you and your family being sent to a prison camp, torture, or public execution.
Another North Korean human rights violation is the medieval style caste system practiced in the totalitarian state. This system is called Songun in North Korea. Songun began after North Korean authorities ran family background checks on everyone living in the newly formed communist state, starting in 1957 and ending sometime in the mid 1960s. The results classified North Korean citizens into one of three categories: loyal, wavering, or hostile. This was determined largely on what their male ancestors did in the 1940s and 50s, and that same generation still dictates the separation of the castes today. If your ancestors were important government officials, Korean war heroes, or played another important role in the establishment of North Korea, you would be classified as loyal. But rather, if you descended from a Christian or Buddhist priest, private entrepreneur, or other anti North Korean philosophy job, you would be labeled as hostile. Your position in this caste system determines a variety of important factors in a North Korean's life. Regardless of your individual actions, having a hostile or wavering label as your caste level affects the colleges you can get accepted into, the person you will marry, because people almost never marry down, or which means to marry someone of a lesser caste, the prestige of the job you will work, and countless other aspects of life. The caste system is still based off of its original formation. Quite literally, North Koreans are still separated by their great grandfathers' contributions to the formation of North Korea.
Probably the most appalling of North Korea's human rights violations occur in its prison labor camps. In a 2016 hearing based on a report titled Inquiry on Crimes Against Humanity in North Korean Political Prisons, testimonies were provided by prison camp survivors as well as North Korean political prison guard. They described multiple graphic atrocities performed in these camps, some of which were routine public executions of prisoners, carried out in front of both children and adults, designed to subdue the prison population. A soldier supervising a forced labor site rolling a log down a steep mountainside, killing 10 prisoners as they were carrying logs up the mountain. A prisoner's newborn baby fed to guard dogs and killed, and the deliberate starvation, malnutrition, overwork, and death of countless prisoners, including between 1,500 to 2,000 prisoners, mostly children, who are believed to have died each year from malnutrition in one camp alone, with many other prisoners beaten to death for failing to meet production quotas. These were not the only atrocities witnessed by these North Korean defectors. There were many more described in this hearing that we feel are too brutal to even discuss. Past co-chair of the IBA War Crimes Committee and the lead lawyer to present evidence of North Korea's alleged crimes against humanity, Stephen Kay, described North Korea's political prisons as a 7-decade reign of impunity. To put this into perspective, some even go as far as to say that political prisons in North Korea are worse than the concentration camps of the Holocaust. In an interview on his co-written report on North Korean prisoners, Thomas Bergenthal, a survivor of the Holocaust, described the political prisons in North Korea as terrible or even worse than Nazi concentration camps.
North Korea does not just violate human rights domestically, however. Another serious human rights violation occurs amongst dispatch workers North Korea sends abroad to earn foreign currency for its regime. North Korea sends out between 70,000 to 100,000 foreign workers to countries such as Russia, China, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Mongolia, Qatar, and several other countries across the Eurasian and African continents. These workers are denied multiple fundamental human rights through which author Teodora Gievchenova claims are attributed to 11 specific means: abuse of vulnerability, deception, restriction of movement, isolation, physical and sexual violence, intimidation and threats, retention of identity documents, withholding of wages, debt bondage, abusive working and living conditions, and excessive overtime. For the sake of time, we'll only get into a couple of these. One of these is the use of deception. Workers are promised high wages that are more than enough to provide for their family, but actually receive just mere portions of what they were originally guaranteed, with the majority of their earnings going back to the government. North Korea manages this process by never having the dispatch workers officially sign contracts, so they don't know exactly what they'll earn. Another key technique used is threats. North Korea almost exclusively hires married men who have families, so the regime has leverage preventing the dispatch worker to escape. This is because, as aforementioned, if the worker managed to escape North Korean grasp, his wife and kids would be sent to a political prison camp, and if they aren't killed themselves, those kids' kids would be forced to spend their life there as well. This is simply too selfish for almost any married North Korean man to even consider.
The concept of human rights has a very political nature, so it is unsurprising that most campaigns experience some politicization. However, North Koreans' human rights issue suffers the most. Whenever human rights are brought up, it is quickly replaced with something of greater importance. There has been no official response to the human rights violations going on in North Korea. Many actions have been taken by the international community, but to no effect. Former British ambassador to North Korea, John Everard, observed in his 2012 memoir, "I can trace no evidence that international efforts had had any significant effect on DPRK behavior."
Historical evidence suggests that the North Korea crisis is by no means unprecedented. Dozens, if not hundreds, of genocides have occurred over the history of civilization, which date all the way back to Neanderthal times, but also more recent genocides such as the Pol Pot Cambodia genocide and the Rwanda genocide. Survivors of other genocides report similar gruesome accounts, such as Hag Baronian, a survivor of the Armenian genocide in early 20th century Europe. Baronian describes a childhood experience in which he was forced to take part in a death march. He recalls, "At one place, my little grandmother loudly cursed the Turkish government for their inhumanity. Pointing to his children, she asked, 'What is the fault of children to be subjected to such suffering?' It was too much for the gendarme to bear. He pulled out his dagger and plunged it into my grandmother's back." Baronian goes on to describe that his grandmother was so defiant that gendarme could not finish her with his dagger. He had to pull out his gun instead. Baronians account further details the brutal reality of genocide and how the debate is a global issue rather than just a Korean peninsula crisis.
But what can we do about this crisis? It is hard to determine exactly. Incumbent Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un has, while the rest of his country suffers from a severe lack of food, resources, and infrastructure, built up one of the world's largest militaries, along with a barrage of nuclear missiles capable of striking major cities in the United States, such as Honolulu, Seattle, and Los Angeles. The sheer power and potential devastation both sides possess has left the sides at an impasse. The United States can't launch a preemptive strike because North Korean ally China would likely defend its counterpart, which could easily result in World War III. However, North Korea also can't launch the first attack because they know the United States would stop at nothing to eliminate the entire regime. The US has a major presence directly to the south in South Korea, and China would have no reason to defend North Korea because they would almost surely realize the DPRK was in the wrong and would likely stay out of the matter altogether. This is why the United States has resorted to placing extreme sanctions on North Korea, which weaken its already bare economy, and also trying to convince China to stop providing aid to the totalitarian state, who is by far North Korea's most important trade partner and food provider.
North Korea cannot last forever. Eventually, the cracks in the armor will become too big to be shoddily patched like they are now. The ultimate question at stake, however, is how many more innocent North Korean lives it will cost.